Word on Words, a program delving into the world of books and their authors. Your host, Mr. John Seigenthaler, chairman of the Freedom Forum First Amendment Center at Vanderbilt University.
Hello, I'm John Seigenthaler. Once again, welcome to A Word on Words. Our guest is Waylon. That's the title of the book. That's the name of the man, Waylon, an autobiography. Welcome to Word on Words, Waylon.
Well, it's good to be here.
Waylon
I watch
Jennings.
your show, by the way.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you here, and now you can watch the two of us together on this show.
There you go.
Waylon, this book, I've already told you, and I want to tell this audience, this book is not just another book for me. I mean, you took me down lanes I never had dreamed I would go. I mean, I lived with you in your early life, which was much tougher than I ever realized. I think the stories in the book are funny and at times plaintive. They're sad and joyous. The anecdotes about celebrities are wonderful, and I congratulate you on doing one terrific job.
Well, thank you. I had a good time. It took 3 years running up and down the road and making tapes and, and talking about it.
Well, I guess we ought to begin. In talking about this book with something you say about yourself in the book. And I'm going to take you well into the back of the book now when you're talking to your son and you're making an acknowledgement to him, worried about his education, worried about his dedication to going to school and doing the very best he can. And you think you just have to tell him that you never graduated from high school, and that you had a GED. And it seems to me that reading this book, and I know you worked with Lenny Kaye on it, but reading the simple eloquence as these stories unfold, I really have to say how much I admire the effort that you put into it, because I know that it must have been a wonderful struggle for you.
Yeah, the thing about the education thing, when I quit school, I realized immediately I'd done wrong, And because when you quit school, all you can do is hang out with quitters. The other parents are not going to let their kids hang out with somebody who's a dropout, And and I went through all my life knowing and having a complex about it, and wishing I had at least graduated from high school, because I'd go into some office and here I am, a big shot singer and hot in the country and making a lot of money and everything, but I knew on the other side of that door there was a man who was educated. And a lot of times when I would stop at that door before I went in, I would have to brace up maybe and act a little tougher than I really was. That's why I went ahead. The thing about it, I was afraid my son Shooter, who's 17 now, he was 10 at that time. I was so afraid he was going to ask me, and he had never had, how far I went in school. And when I told him, I said, "Look, son, there's something I did a long time ago that was wrong." And I said, and I'm going to try to straighten it out now, at least for my own mind. I'm going to get my GED. I quit school, And he looked at me and I said, "Now I'm in a lot of trouble because it's been 30 years since I even thought about school. So you got to help me." And he was studying fractions at that time. I said, "I don't have a clue about fractions or algebra." Finally, I told him, I said, "Anybody that understands the algebra ought to go to a treatment center." But he helped me through that. He did, and it was a great bonding thing with me and him, because I've never lied to him, and I've always tried to teach him to be truthful.
Well, we'll come back to your disclosures to him. I'm lucky to have you for 2 weeks on this program, and I really appreciate the opportunity. We'll come back to another disclosure you made to Shooter maybe next week. But let me take you back to your roots. We hear the term dirt poor. You were born dirt poor. Yeah. You say that your father was the hardest working man you ever knew in your life, and still you recall the first time you ever saw a man cry. He wept because there was not food.
Yeah, he did. He was working for $1 a day and he was working sun up to sundown. Before sun up, he milked, it was over 20 head of cattle. And when he came in the evening, he had a lot of work to do. He just, but you know, the thing about it, everybody we knew was just like that, except the people we worked for, you know. And I saw my dad. I mean, he was the kindest man you ever met, and he did. He had his head in his hands. He was crying. My mother was taking us out the door to go find something to eat, and that was the first time I ever saw linoleum. I thought that was about the greatest thing I ever saw was a linoleum, and it probably was an ice box. Or it could have been, because there was electric lights in there. It could have been a refrigerator, but I don't know. That had to be in about 1940, somewhere along there. It was me and my little brother Tommy that she took down there. It was about a mile away, and the man was real kind. And I don't think I had seen, you know, of course, dishes like that. But you know what? As I look back on that, everybody we knew, my cousins, they were worse off than we were, you know, if you can imagine that. And we lived in where it was a dirt floor, you know. But I remember Mama sweeping a dirt floor. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, I go back to that because there are a number of stories in the book that really, in the early phases of the book, that really deal with how tough things were and how difficult it was for your family to overcome. You talk about your grandparents and one who was sort of a role model for you, who drove a truck and drank. And
Grandpa Shipley, you know, I got in an awful lot of trouble because I said something in the book, you know, and it's talking about his drinking. Now, my mama and my aunts got mad at me because they thought nobody in Littlefield knew that Grandpa drank. Everybody knew Grandpa drank. You know, I mean, he was the guy who would get drunk, and if they give him any trouble, he'd put his hand around a gas pump and whip half of the police department. They even called me one time and said, "What are we going to do with your grandpa?" And I was in Tennessee at the time, and I said, "You best leave him alone, you know, 'cause you ain't going to win." I think Grandpa taught me to cuss, which is not a very good thing, but all right. But you know, he had a way about him. He had a swagger, and the way he talked. When he cussed, it just didn't bother you that bad because it just seemed like it just slid right by. He and Grandma loved each other so much, but Grandpa was strong. And now he did his drinking, but he never got drunk you know, and spent all of his money on booze. He had money for food in the house. Everybody had food, and everybody was fine. And he'd go get drunk on old Cooter Brown.
You said that in the book in those words. He got drunk on Cooter Brown.
Yeah, that was an old saying. You know.
Now, I just have to tell our viewers that this book you worked with you worked with Lenny Kaye on this book, and Lenny Kaye put it in your own words. And as you say, you have known for a long time how to cuss, and there are a few cuss words in the book. And I know we're on educational television in many stations, so I'm going to refrain from repeating verbatim every word you say. But there is you're talking about pulling cotton, and where the term high cotton came from. Yeah. And I never knew, I've said many times, I feel like I'm in high cotton, but I never knew until you told me what high cotton was.
Yeah, it's easier to pull.
That's right.
You know, them little old bitty ones down there, Jessi, she came from Arizona, and they have cotton there. But
your wife, Jessi, Jessi Colter.
Yeah, and you know, it's up this high, and it's a lot easier to pull. And,
but you didn't like to pull it short or long. And you say in the book, when you were 16 years old, you said, "I didn't plant this stuff." Well, you say it.
Well, I said, "I didn't plant this stuff, and I ain't going to pull it up."
And stuff is not exactly the word you use in the book.
I didn't. But you don't know how bad it is, you know. I mean, like, you can work in a coal mine. You can work anywhere, and it's all hard, you know, hard work. But to me, that may be harder than any of it, because you're sitting there, it's free, and you could take off running, and nobody could stop you and all this stuff, but you can't. And there's so many things that I remember from being in that cotton patch. I learned a song called, well, now I've gone blank. Anyway, I learned a song one day by putting a piece of paper and looking at it at the end of the row, and then trying to memorize it. All was the last letter.
The last letter.
Tommy Hill's song.
Yes.
And then the thing that was bad is that freight train. Yeah. That freight train sounded like death. I don't know why, but in the distance, you know, and you knew that it was going somewhere and you wasn't on it. I left about a half a sack of cotton, which was a 12-foot sack, and I said, that's when I said that, and that sack may still be there. But if they're waiting on me to come back and get it, I ain't burned many bridges in my life, but that's one I did.
Well, let me just take you from that to your role in music. Of course, your father had a guitar. Most of the people in your family had guitars, and as you said, no television, not much radio, and what people did for entertainment was go to one another's house and sing. Mm-hmm. And you loved the idea that your father played the harmonica and could pick.
Yeah.
And so you picked it up naturally when you were young.
Yeah, they would show me a chord, and Mama and him both. I remember Mama taught me a song, and I don't know how big I was, 8 or 9 years old, 7 or 8, somewhere along there. Said, we got a cow, he had a holler horn, fed that cow on green popcorn. And that was my first learning how to play. It's 2 chords, you know. But my dad, he had, it was a blues thing. And the other guy only guy I ever saw that played like that was Carter, June Carter's uncle. And AP's brother, I guess it was. And but he did it too, and his hands looked like my dad's. This hand, my hand looks a little like his, but they would hit like this
with the thumb
and the finger.
And the finger.
And it was a blues thing that somehow it put you in the mind of the blues, and the country blues, I guess you'd call it. And he sang. He liked Jimmy Rogers, so. Him and Mama, I grew up that guitar. The first time I remember anything, I was in a jumper swing that Daddy had made, and the lamplight was coming from the kitchen, and I guess I was in the bedroom or something. But I saw this guitar. It had a cowboy on it, on a horse, rearing up, and I was trying my best to get it, and I couldn't have been 2 years old yet. But that was the most, I was just mesmerized with the guitar. I can still feel it.
Well, it was one thing you could do when you got on that, when you put that sack of cotton down, the one thing you could do was you could pick.
Well, that's all I wanted to do. You know, that probably cost me not ever getting involved or caring about education or anything. There was one thing I was going to do. I can't remember when I wasn't, that wasn't what I wanted to be, was a singer.
You know, you talk about going through life, your own career, and as it unfolds in the book. It seems to me that there is one thing that comes across. From very early on, you knew what you wanted to do. You knew what your career was going to be. You didn't know how it was going to turn out. Didn't have any way to know whether you'd be successful. God knows there was no way to suspect that you'd reach the very top of the charts and be an outlaw and a highwayman and a star and a celebrity, an international celebrity. But that all came about. It does seem to me that you had not only in your mind that you wanted to perform, but you knew how you wanted to perform, and you were going to do it your way. And that has sort of characterized many of the conflicts you've had later on as your career progressed. That single-minded purpose. I know how I want to do it, and I don't need anybody else telling me what my talent is or how it ought to work. Where'd that come from? I mean, I think that's fair, is it not?
Yes, it is, and that might have come from Grandpa Shipley too. Now, he, like everything he did was against the grain, and I more or less did that too. But since the day I can remember, only that, I never liked to be told what to do. I just didn't like to be told what to do. And I didn't like for people to do things wrong, to me. But as far as the drive I had for that, it was just something that was born in me, and it's still there. They called it outlaw. They called it all kinds of things, and all it was like I tried to do right by people, and I was taught that. My dad was very, very strong, but he was a very gentle person. And there's one place in the book where I talk about where he backed this boxer down,
That's right.
And that was one of the things right there that stuck with me, and to this day I can still.
We might just share that little scene with our viewers, because what had happened was this boxer's little brother had his ears boxed by your little brother.
Yeah.
By Tommy. Yeah. And the boxer came over and was going to mistreat your brother.
Yeah, he was going to give him a whipping, he said. And my dad was chopping the garden. He's working in the garden like he did every evening. And he wasn't a big man, he was about 5'10" or 11 somewhere. And you never think of your dad as being a big tough guy, I mean, I never thought of him that way. And all of a sudden everybody was afraid of Strawberry. Well, Strawberry was over there and had my little brother, and he was Tommy. He was just screaming to the top of his lungs, Daddy said, "What are you doing with that boy?" And he said, "I'm fixing to give him a whipping. He hurt my little brother." And Daddy said, "Now you turn him loose." Now Dad had a hoe, in his hand. And he said, "Oh man, don't get yourself in no trouble." Said, "I fight for a living." He said, "You turn him loose or I'll come over there and break your back," which was the strongest thing I ever heard in my life, I mean, he didn't say he was going to knock him down. He said he was going to break his back. And I thought, you know what? He had to look. This guy was 6'4", and muscled up. But the thing that taught me such a lesson, if you're right, Well, he went across the fence, and that old boy said, "Oh man, you're crazy. Don't come over here." And he left the hoe back there. Now I might have taken that hoe with me. He didn't do it, and he said, "Turn him loose." And he says, "You come over here." And said, "I'll get you." And he said, "I'm coming over there. If you don't turn him loose, I'm going to break your back." He said it again. And that was, I don't think many guys get to see their dad in that light.
Strawberry went home.
Strawberry said, "Oh, you're crazy," and just let him go.
Well, when you tell that story, I'm reminded immediately, I flash deep into the book, and there's a studio scene where you are into a cutting a recording, and you take it to some executives, business executives in the music business. And they listen to it, and they're not impressed by it. And they suggest, well, maybe they want to get the great country music producer Billy Sherrill in. They're going to put a little music here and soften it up there and do some strings. And you say, "I like strings, and Billy Sherrill's great at what he does, but you don't get me at all." I mean, and that sort of thing has happened again and again. The anecdotes in the book really document.
That was really Willie. That was Willie's album.
That was Willie. That was Willie's album, and you were there, and you were explaining Willie's album. That's exactly right.
Neil Reshin had asked me to go with him. And
Neil Reshin, your financial manager.
Yeah, and he was both mine and Willie's manager.
Right.
And this Bruce Lundvall, let me tell you something. He's quite a man. Because when he said that, he got it up, and I said, "Billy Sherrill's great," but I said, "Take that tape off." I told Neil, I said, "Or you won't be my manager or Willie's either." I said, "That's stupid," and I called him a bad name, and I don't know what he's doing or has not a clue about this music. And I said, "Get it off." So I got up, I said, "I know I'm in your office and I'm getting out," and that's it. So he said, "No, sit down." And he said, "What am I missing?" And I told him, I said, "All of it. You're missing the whole thing. You're missing what 70,000 people came to Dripping Springs to see."
For Willie's concert to hear.
And he said, "Let me listen again." And so he played it a little farther, and he said, "We're going to release this." And he said, I think you're wrong, dead wrong. And it wasn't really. About 6 months later, I was coming down the stairs in my office, and I heard somebody say, they said, someone here to see you. And I said, who is it? And he said, just that stupid, and repeated what I said. You know? And I was, oh no, but he brought me a gold album. And it was that Redhead Stranger album.
Oh yeah, from Willie's Redhead Stranger album.
I can't, you know, my problem is keeping my mouth shut. You know, sometimes it's not even any of my business, but I can't help it. You know, I tell you, when I think something, like I knew that album was right, and I, you know, I couldn't see it just die like that, and it would have never happened.
Well, you're very candid throughout the book. One of the things you were very honest about is your marriages. And you sort of, just to go back to youth again, you remember your grandmother, whenever there's any conversation about girls, she would say, nasty, nasty, nasty.
Oh, yeah, nasty, nasty, nasty. That's the way she said it. I still got a complex.
Well, the theme runs through the book. You come back to it 2 or 3 times, but it was but the marriages were very difficult, I take it.
Yeah, it was. We were too young. My first wife, you know what? I wrote a song just recently, and it's on a new album. It's called Right for the Times. And it's actually about my 3 ex-wives. Now, everybody thinks it's about one woman, which tells you that I was making the same mistake every time, you know, it was like, it's hard to remember even why we got married, you know.
Yeah, well, you and
in
Maxine.
Those times, yeah, me and Maxine, and we never got along. We did things to really aggravate each other. I don't think we had intentions to hurt one another. I don't think we were that far along in the things, but just to make each other mad, and we did that very well. And having the kids, they say, do you know what's causing that? I don't really think we did.
Right.
Because, I mean, it's just one after the other. Excuse me. And they're wonderful. And when you look at them and think that
the children.
You know, yeah, I look at our kids, I look at them and think, you know, what we put them through all these years, because, you know, they're pulled one way and then the other.
Then your second marriage really broke up because as you say it, she couldn't look with the same affection on your children.
Yeah.
As she did on.
That's what happened.
On her own child.
Yeah. I had the kids with me, and she just couldn't deal with that. I was doing good in Phoenix there, but it got to a point to where she couldn't. Only thing she would say to him would be discipline. You know? She wasn't a mean person. She didn't mean to be, but I have known a lot of men and women who can't deal with that. Now, I don't know. There's just something that's not in there.
Right. And then the third wife, Barbara, was the daughter of a millionaire.
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of had the idea that she could move you in directions that were away from music and where she'd like for you to go. And it worked for a while, but I mean, it didn't work getting you to go where you didn't want to go, but the marriage worked for a while.
Barbara's a dear heart, and we're still friends, you know. But she had no clue what I was about. The music business, she saw things going on that she knew wasn't right, even though she didn't even know anything about the music business, you know. But the thing is, the bigger I got, it seemed like she felt it was farther away from her, you know. And her dad even came and wanted to buy me out of my deal.
Yeah.
And he said, I've invested in blue sky before.
That's right. That line's in the book. That's right.
That was his mistake. I didn't consider myself blue sky. Yeah. But you know, the best way I've ever tried to describe Barbara, you know, and the thing with me and her is that sometimes, you know, we loved each other, but sometimes it's not enough for that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And again and again and again in those marriages, the phrase "nasty, nasty, nasty" kept turning up and working your guilt a little bit.
Yeah, I tried to be right, you know, as well as I could. Yeah, but especially with Barbara, you know, and But after that, I mean, I thought I was all over. I would never, ever be able to be married.
Well, you had worked your way through through honky tonks, through radio stations. You've been very competitive in the radio business. You had gotten to know a lot of people who were going to be stars. Your great friend, the late Buddy Holly, how close you all were. And so far as the marriage is concerned, you finally got it right.
Sure did. And
It was a wonderful Jessi.
yeah, everybody said, "What's your secret? Been married so long?" And I said, "I ain't got one. Jessi has. She's the one with the secret." You know, this woman is unbelievable. Just this morning on the way out here, I'll tell you. You know, there was some things going on. You know, in the people that work with us. You know, she called me on the phone in the car. You know, and she said, "You just don't worry about these things. Is there something good happening?" You know. And when she says that, she knows what she's talking about.
One of the most touching scenes in the book is that 25th, that 25th ceremony.
Oh yeah.
Where Will Campbell sort of presides and remarries you.
Yeah, that first one, I don't know if that one took. You know, I've often wondered if we were really legally married. Jessi started. This guy in Vegas, we went in there. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Had my bass player with me. He was the best man. And so we get there, and here's this guy behind this desk, starts. And he says, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here." He's done 30 of them earlier that day. Yeah. And Jessi goes, "Ah!" starts laughing. And that's the only time when she gets tickled like that, you know, because I know she can't help it, and she's not going to quit. And I'm hollering, "Be quiet. Stop that," you know. Okay, now that's enough. Okay, and this guy said, finally this guy turned and said, I said, "What?" He said, "Does she?" And I said, "Does she what?" He said, "You know, does she take," you know, and he said,